of view, where in a democracy, those points of views are allowed. And you are doing exactly what you say the Cuban government is by denying myself, a member of Congress who represents the same number of constituents you represent, denying me the opportunity to present my point of view. What is wrong with this ticket?
I would love to have this same type of political discourse in Havana.
Let's have it in Havana. If we normalize relations and have normal diplomatic relations where entrepreneurs can thrive in Cuba.
The only people who have that key is the Cuban regime. They could make that happen right now.
Madam
And
Chair,
unfortunately, you have been friends with those who are not in favor of the Cuban people.
Madam
I
Chair,
represent
I
those
am a
people,
friend
and
of
I
the
know
United States. I am a member of the United States Congress. I am a friend of the global community, and I want to see normal relations between every country in the world and the people of the United States and the government of the United States, whether we agree or disagree. The only way we can ensure the values of democracy are promoted is being at the table, engaging with
Fidel Castro has been the worst dictator that the Hemisphere has seen since the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492. So
Madam Chair, talk about Donald Trump.
The subcommittee, we are about to start this hearing in order. Thank you. The subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is—
Chairwoman, I wanted to ask unanimous consent for Representatives Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida and Barbara Lee of California, both senior members of the Committee on Appropriations, to participate in this hearing after all members have had their chance to question the witnesses.
Thank you for that request. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is more than welcome. Barbara Lee is not.
Can I ask you the reasoning, Chairwoman? The reason I ask—
Oh, I can tell you about the reasoning is because Barbara Lee, who I know is a distinguished member of the Democratic Party, is a friends with the oppressors and not with the Cuban people. Barbara Lee has been friends with Fidel Castro, and there are many statements that we can't repeat, and that indicates that she is just not with the people that I represent, who are the Cuban exile community in Miami.
Sure.
She is not a friend of the Cuban people that we are trying to liberate.
Point of personal privilege, if I could respond really quick. Chairwoman, you know I respect your work, even though our positions on different issues with respect to the Western Hemisphere and Latin America are sometimes far apart. I respected your voice and your work and the policy that you've worked on, but this move to not allow one of our colleagues in the United States Congress, who's been elected by the people she represents, to sit and participate on a panel like this is, I think, unprecedented. If it's happened before, I don't know about it. And I know that, like many, you have been critical of the government in Cuba in part because it suppresses free speech and suppresses different opinions. And so without getting to the substance of your critique of Congresswoman Lee, Chairwoman, that's exactly what you're doing right now, is you're suppressing somebody from even sitting here and participating in the same way that the Cuban government has suppressed opinion and perspective for decades.
My dear colleague, the Cuban people do not have a platform to express themselves like distinguished lady Barbara Lee or Congresswoman Barbara Lee has had, because she has been able to go to many media outlets. She's been able to express her admiration for Fidel Castro, but this is not the site to do that. She has no position, or she is not welcomed on this committee that I humbly chair. So I thank you very much for your request, but not this time. Therefore, the subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere will come.
entrepreneurs can thrive in Cuba.
The only people who have that heat is the Cuban regime. They could make that happen right now.
Madam
And
Chair.
unfortunately, you have been friends with those who are not in favor of the Cuban people.
Madam Chair, I am
those
a
people
friend of
in
the
your-
United States. I am a member of the United States Congress. I am a friend of the global community, and I want to see normal relations between every country in the world and the people of the United States and the government of the United States, whether we agree or disagree. The only way we can ensure the values of democracy are promoted is being at the table, engaging.
Fidel Castro has been the worst dictator that the Hemisphere has seen since the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492. So
Madam Chair, talk about Donald Trump. Brought you
the
raised
subcommittee, we are.
autocratic.
We among other critical bilateral issues. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. And thank you very much to Mr. Jacobstein for coming and for Mr. Roy for being here and wanting to dedicate your time and your expertise to clarify this topic a little bit more. Do you see this poster behind me? What is it? It's a store owned by the Cuban regime. It's a store that sells Gucci's or Armani products.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, let me just acknowledge our pro-choice caucus co-chair, Diana DeGette, who is in a hearing right now and is unable to get out. She may be here toward the end of the press conference, but I want to just thank her for her tremendous leadership. Also, to our esteemed Democratic Women's Caucus Chair, Lois Frankel, and all of our members. And of course, our fearless whip, Catherine Clark, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. And also, let me just thank PCC leadership team, staff, and all of the incredible members of the caucus for their tireless work to protect reproductive freedom. Now, as co-chair of the Pro-Choice Caucus, which I am very proud of, I am so proud that over 24 members of Congress today brought guests who highlight the human impact of the GOP's extreme policies on reproductive care. Many of these remarkable storytellers, activists, providers, and more are standing in solidarity with us today. Soon you will hear directly from these very brave women. Women who are on the front lines of the war on reproductive freedom. Women whose entire lives have been disrupted or threatened simply because they sought or provided basic health care. Amanda, Caitlin, Brittany, and Damla, I think I can speak for everyone here when I say that we really are in awe of your courage, your strength, and your determination. Yes. Let's thank them, first of all, for being here. But also, I want to just say, I want to thank them for using their voices to effect change. And I personally know how vulnerable you must feel. I know how I felt when I talked about the abortion I had at 15 before Roe. But by sharing your own stories, you're calling attention to the devastating human toll of these extreme laws and raising the pressure on the GOP to put a stop to it. And that matters for millions of young people who don't know a world without Roe. People like my granddaughter, who will be here shortly, who I decided to bring as my guest this year, Simone. Being a young person in today's America is hard enough already. Can you imagine being a teenager and being told your body is not truly yours? That politicians have more control over your personal health decisions than you do? We cannot stop fighting for our young people. They deserve better. They deserve comprehensive, accurate, culturally responsive sexual education, like I'm pushing my bill, the Real Education and Access for Healthy Youth Act. They deserve a future where they can access the full suite of reproductive care options, from birth control to IVF to abortion. They deserve to access that care no matter how much money they make. If Congress passed my Each Act this month, millions of people, especially black and brown women, would finally have equal access to abortion coverage. And finally, these women all deserve privacy and respect no matter their decision. That's why I never talked about my abortion, because I felt it was my decision, nobody else's business. So I know what it was like before Roe, but these last 2 years, we've seen what it was like. Make no mistake, we will never, ever, ever back down. Alongside the Biden administration, we will continue to fight for a future where our reproductive freedoms are no longer up for debate. Our bodies, our choice.
Mrs. Barbara Lee from California. I'm sorry, I got a little confused here. I yield 3 minutes to you,
Okay,
Mrs. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and our ranking member, and I too want to associate myself with the remarks of our ranking member and just say a couple of things about this budget. First of all, or a budget. This budget may not be aspirational, or any budget may not be aspirational, but it is a moral document and a reflection of our nation's values. Sadly, Republicans' proposed budget once again confirms that they are deeply out of step with the priorities of people in America. We haven't even passed fiscal 2024 spending bills, not all of them at least, until, excuse me, as we propose this budget for 2025 that would actually harm our most vulnerable communities. It'll rip away critical benefits, protect the wealthy from paying their fair share of taxes, and increase our bloated Pentagon budget. This budget is extreme. It's a GOP extreme budget, and it fails to deliver on this country's top priorities, which of course is tackling climate change, furthering racial equity, which is extremely important. I believe that Republicans would think so at least. Expanding healthcare affordability and accessibility, creating good paying jobs, and lowering everyday costs. While Republicans are making cuts left and right, they won't cut where it matters the most. The Department of Defense failed its sixth audit, mind you, failed its sixth audit in a row last year. But instead of using their power to address the fraud, waste, and abuse within the Pentagon, Republicans in Congress are once again giving them a blank check. If we cut just $100 billion from the defense budget, like my People Over Pentagon Act would do, we could redirect funding to meet so many of our needs in our communities and, yes, reduce the deficit. Reallocating these funds from the Pentagon could power every household in the United States with solar energy, hire 1 million elementary school teachers amid a worsening teacher shortage, provide free tuition for 2 out of 3 public college students, or cover medical care for 7 million veterans. This is what a document such as a budget would reflect if in fact we saw it as a moral document and as one reflecting our values. I'm very disappointed that in this extreme GOP budget proposal, it would deepen poverty and increase hardships for working families nationwide. And so I cannot in good conscience vote for a budget that puts profits and politics over people, and that's what this budget is doing, and I urge my colleagues to vote no. I yield the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady from California, and now yield 3 minutes to my friend, Mr. Blake Moore, our Deputy Chair of the GOP. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and good morning, Mr. Secretary. Good morning. A couple of things I'd like to ask you. First of all, I've been working very closely with Secretary Becerra and your team at USDA to scale food as medicine, which of course is the integration of food-based interventions into healthcare to address food and nutrition insecurity. Given the growing demand of organic and regenerative foods used in food as medicine services, there's going to be a real need to develop the plan and invest in this transition from conventional farming. And so I'd just like to find out if you could briefly discuss how USDA is working to help improve the Food is Medicine initiative and coordinating with HHS? That's the first question. Then secondly, let me just ask you with regard to Cuba. Given the prior administration and now the Biden administration, in terms of our agricultural products and Cuba as a market, I know that Cuba would rather buy ag products from the ag sector in America. And I'm wondering how you see that evolving. Is there currently just a hold on any kind of exporting to Cuba? And what do you think is the path forward? And finally, just with regard to urban agriculture, of course, urban farms are incredibly important to my county, Alameda County, where my district is located. These farms provide food to people in need. They offer educational opportunities and create new economic opportunities in underserved communities. But the funding to start a new urban farm or improve an existing one continues to be challenging for many of my constituents. And so I'm wondering, I know the budget supports innovative community-based urban farms like the ones in my district, but seems like they're having a hard time accessing the funds. And I don't know if they need technical assistance or easier access to the funding, or how do you think USDA can make it more accessible?
I'm going to work backwards from the questions you asked. Actually, the budget that you just passed cuts the funding to urban ag, which makes it even more difficult than it was before. So you may want to take a look at how much money is being allocated to the urban ag office at USDA. That's the office that basically coordinates the FSA resources and the NRCS resources for urban ag centers. We have 17 centers. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar enough to know whether there's one in your district, but we've asked for resources to expand that beyond 17. Each of the 17 urban centers has an FSA office in place and an NRCS representative that can work with producers to try to determine. The other thing I would suggest is that you look at the Regional Food Business Center concept that I mentioned earlier, because that too can help farmers potentially think about ways in which they can create market opportunities for whatever it is they're growing. On Cuba, I mean, the reality is there's a significant impediment to trade in Cuba because of, I think, legislation that requires essentially payment in advance in cash in U.S. dollars, which makes it very, very difficult for a lot of ag trade to take place. I know that there are secretaries of agriculture and commissioners from states that go to Cuba periodically with trade missions with some limited success. It is an option. I mean, it's an island that basically imports 80% of their food. So there's obviously a market there. It's just a question of whether you can remove that barrier and make it a little bit easier from a business perspective to do business in Cuba. On Food is Medicine, there are three responses. One, we did and have increased our commitment to GusNIP, which is the program that basically funds the prescription medicine program with pediatricians and encourages and incents fruit and vegetable purchasing as ways in which pediatricians in particular can assist young people with particular diseases and challenges that they face. You mentioned regenerative agriculture. That's one of the reasons why we established the Climate Smart Agriculture Commodity Initiative. Take a look, have your staff take a look at that in terms of the state of California and the number of projects that are currently operating in that state, and the producers that are involved, and the partners who are involved, and the universities that are involved. And then finally, we have an organic transition initiative designed to make it easier for people to be, if they wish to transition, to become organic producers. We also just recently announced, I think roughly 50 grants, I think it's right, 50 grants, market development grants to encourage more market opportunities for organic production, which would make supply more accessible. We're also working with some schools and the first partner in California to ensure that, those resources are available for their farm-to-school program.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
California, and now yield 5 minutes to Ms. Barbara Lee from California.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Director Young. Thank you so much for your leadership and for a budget that, yes, it does reflect, I think, the values of our country. But also, let me just say, I also believe that a budget is a moral document. And Director Young, I think it's fundamentally wrong to allow the size of the defense budget to increase, even though the Pentagon recently failed, I believe it was its sixth audit in a row. And the president's budget requests now $184.5 billion more for defense than non-defense programs. And so I guess just speaking about the morality of this, how in the world do we allow this to happen? And why should we have confidence that the Pentagon will spend taxpayer dollars responsibly when they can't even pass an audit, rather 6 audits? And then secondly, where could we spend and how could we spend the $184.5 billion to support programs that would protect the middle class and keep people out of poverty? And I know that there are programs that are consistently underfunded because of defense spending increases. And so I don't understand how the department can make this kind of a commitment when they can't even pass not just 1 clean audit, but 6 audits. How do we allow that to happen, Director Young? And I mean, we penalize taxpayers for scamming the system and for cheating on their taxes. Something is fundamentally wrong.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Look, the budget we put forth for non-defense and defense comply with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Many of the members here support it. This president, from day one, has been committed to upholding our nation's sacred obligation to protect and equip and prepare our service members. I appreciate the concerns on audits. I share those, and defense and all of our agencies we expect to be good stewards, but we believe that this budget is not only complies with the FRA deal, but also meets the needs of our troops. We're in a complicated world, as you see, but we also believe in diplomacy. I know the subcommittee that you're ranking member on, and we believe we put a balanced approach between our military and our diplomatic presence in the budget we put forward.
Okay, Director, and that's fine, but I still want to know how an agency, a department can get away with failing 6 audits and still get an increase in their budget. And believe you me, when I talk about defense spending, I'm talking about, and I know where a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse is with the weapons and arms dealers. It's not with our troops, and I fully support making sure that our troops are taken care of, that we're ready, our readiness is where it should be. But I, for the life of me, can't understand why taxpayers spend hard-earned dollars now or ask for an increase when the defense budget continues to get scammed. Failing 6 audits, it's unacceptable.
That is unacceptable, but as you pointed out, and I pointed out, the mission of the department means that we have to put forward a budget that is aligned with our national security strategy, which means we have to provide the funds to update our equipment and provide for our service members. A lot of this budget is also a pay increase for military personnel, and we have to remain prepared and on a footing given the complexities around the world.
I understand that. Okay, so how is the Pentagon penalized? What triggers, if you fail 6 audits, how do you recoup that those investments, taxpayer dollars, and then what penalties? I mean, ordinary folks get penalized for wrongdoing, for not living by the rules.
Part of the Pentagon's issue on audits, and I want to make clear, failing an audit from this standpoint does not mean the Pentagon doesn't know where most of their money is being spent. One, they need to get their real estate and knowledge of what they own and how to cost that out. That is a big driver to their audit situation. We're committed to working with them, just as we work with other agencies who have management and budget challenges, and we've got to get this right. You're absolutely correct.
But they flunked 6 audits, and the president's asking for a $187 billion increase. You would think that until they got it right, we would at least ensure that all of our national security needs are met. but not give them an increase because they're going to continue to flunk. They'll be flunking a seventh audit if in fact they're not penalized and they don't get this under control. And I think the taxpayer deserves to know why in the world aren't they being penalized if they're flunking audits rather than getting an increase? Something's fundamentally morally wrong with that. Mr.
Gentlelady
Chairman.
makes a good point. Her time's expired. We're going to now,
Second, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me just say thank you to members who are raising the issue of Chad and Sudan. When I was there, I was reminded that in Chad's one of the poorest countries in the world, first of all. Secondly, that the last congressional delegation which visited Chad was, I believe, in 2009, 2010. So I would encourage members as we put together CODELs to visit Chad, because when you look at what's taking place and how Chad is taking care of these refugees, it's a lessons learned. 70% are women and children coming from Sudan, fleeing violence. The men are being slaughtered as they attempt to leave. And in fact, we're talking about people, and I visited Darfur many times in the early 2000s. Some of these refugees were children in Darfur in a refugee camp who are now have fled to Chad in a refugee camp. So it's a disaster of unspeakable proportions. So I hope the press picks up this and reports more on what is taking place in Sudan and Chad, and encourage not only the humanitarian assistance, but push harder for a diplomatic resolve and a ceasefire. On the Caribbean, Madam Ambassador, you know, we've been pushing hard to create a better partnership with the people of the Caribbean. How do we better demonstrate that the United States values their partnership? I also was recently down in the Caribbean, and believe you me, China is, as you know, everywhere in the Caribbean. And many of the countries, most of the countries are designated as middle-income countries when we know that they're very poor for the most part. The climate crisis is wreaking havoc on the islands. There are barriers to assistance and financing to better combat the effects of climate. And so the $12 million that we set aside recently to promote more inclusive growth in the Caribbean, wonder how that's working. Have we engaged a little bit more? Have we engaged more with people of the Caribbean and governments of the Caribbean? And finally, I'll just say there's one ambassador in Barbados who has, I believe he has 6 or 7 islands with no airplane. Has to fly it to Miami or New York, USAID. I mean, so what kind of message does that send in terms of importance of these small island nations who are great partners for the United States, but who we still haven't seen as valued appropriately?
Well, I mean, you've been on this case for many, many years. I always hesitate to look back and see just how long you've been pushing us in a direction, but I hope you see that it's really making a difference. I mean, it is the way this administration has engaged the Caribbean, I think, is unlike any that I have seen, including Vice President Harris's engagement with CARICOM, our diplomats' most recent engagement with CARICOM diplomatically around Haiti and transition. But in terms of resources where you've placed a lot of emphasis, USAID has expanded our footprint, something you've been asking for a long time, to 2 new field offices in Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago. At FY21, we were at just 18 million for, again, countries and communities with great needs. We're up in FY23, we're up to about 45 million. It's, again, very small compared to the work we could be doing in economic growth, in health, in disease surveillance and the like. What I find exciting, and this gets to, again, this larger culture of leveraging that we're building, is small investments that USAID is making to unlock greater pools of resources. So we supported the establishment of the Blue-Green Bank with the government of Barbados. That was just a $5 million contribution. It's going to be leveraged for hundreds of millions of dollars. We worked with the governments to help them access Green Climate Fund money. That's something that's a work in progress. Green Climate Fund, has a lot of resources coming in from all over the world, but small island states who are the most vulnerable to climate change's ravages have been the least able to compete and submit proposals, project-ready proposals. And so that's, I think, a niche that USAID can help when it comes to climate adaptation and resilience, which these countries need desperately. And then we've just launched a new resilience fund with the CARICOM Development Fund. We provided just $1.75 million, again, not small money, but that's being leveraged to develop a fund that will have a target investment of around $100 million. So I think again, we'll grow our budget, grow our footprint, hopefully get the ambassador a plane, although Miami is said to be, Chairman says, nice place to come through, but that we need an ability to access, these communities and show with our presence, a presence that can then also translate into drawing more private sector investment, because as the ambassador and our teams get around and expand our eyes and ears on the ground, we're better able then to latch up and to matchmake with people here in North America, in the United States.
Thank you. You didn't take too much more than the 4 seconds that you got from me.
Thank you for the 5 seconds I got from you. Appreciate it.
So this distinguished rank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me go back to my opening statement. Did you want to respond?
I'm just noting that the clock doesn't seem to be working. And I have our clock, and I have a self-interest in the clock working.
We will, all right, we'll see what we can do about that. Okay, actually, and because, one of the privileges of being a chair and ranking member is that the clock works to our advantage. So.
Let's see if I can reclaim some of your time. As I mentioned, Madam Administrator, in my opening statement, we're really failing to invest adequately in our diplomacy and our development toolkits. The recently passed fiscal 2024 SFOBS bill cut development assistance and economic support funds by about 10% each. Now, how are you able to make the case for development both within the administration and publicly if, in fact, these cuts continue? What new public arguments are you making to build, I guess, broader public and political support? And finally, again, going to the defense budget, we increased the Pentagon spending by $27 billion last year. That's almost as big as USAID's fiscal 25 budget request, I believe roughly around $28 billion. And so what would USAID be able to do if we doubled USAID budget, making only a minor dent, mind you, minor dent? I know there's about 150 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse in the resources provided to the Defense Department, and how would this impact both U.S. security and the security of our country, allies, and partners?
Well, there's a lot in your question, and grateful, of course, for the premise of the question. I think it was the day before yesterday, I testified by our Senate counterpart Appropriations Subcommittee, and Senator Graham began the hearing by saying, I'm as hawkish as the next guy, but we can't kill our way out of this mess, meaning the number of crises that exist around the world, so many of them at their root lie either severe economic deprivation, evil radicalization, but that still requires reaching young people and, diverting them from the path of radicalization. We just experienced a once-in-a-century pandemic where more lab capacity, more surveillance certainly is one of the lessons we take from that something that can harm American lives can come from anywhere. And we have a great global health security initiative that you all have supported. But in the bill that just passed, we had to cut it by $200 million. And that's, I know COVID is receding, but not for those families who lost loved ones. And we just, can't know precisely where the next threat to American health is going to come from. but we can diversify our portfolio and really make investments with other countries, leveraging those investments to get other countries to do more as well. So I think, again, to your point, we need to make the case in terms of the security and the welfare of the American people. I gave some examples at the top about our economic interest as well in enhancing regulatory environments for American companies to invest, enhancing trade, fighting corruption, so more of the proceeds actually go to the people in these countries. But I do hear a lot up here rightly about geopolitical competition as well with the PRC. And, you ask if we could double our budget, I mean, I would be able to meet, I think, much more of the demand signal that we are getting to be the preferred partner. We are the partner of choice. There is a ton of buyer's remorse because of the consequences of the Belt and Road Initiative in terms of debt distress. People are ready for stepped-up engagement with the United States across Asia, across sub-Saharan Africa, in our own hemisphere. But that is not something that we're not in a position to optimize our ability to take advantage of that buyer's remorse by seeing what is going to be around a 10% cut to our development assistance account this year.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. If we have a second go-around, I'll yield any time I have so that we can get to additional questions.
Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, the ranking member of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, Ms. Lee.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the distinguished ranking member for yielding and also for her tremendous leadership on global peace and security issues in this House. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of H.R. 8035. This bill provides nearly $10 billion in economic assistance for Ukraine and surrounding countries with nearly $8 billion in direct budget support. Now, when I visited Ukraine in 2019, I immediately recognized the love of the Ukrainian people for their country and for their democracy. Since the war broke out, I've met with Ukrainians in the region. Actually, I was with Speaker Pelosi during that visit, and I've met and heard firsthand the dire situations that they face amidst Russian aggression. I've talked with civil society organizations funded by the United States who, facing danger and violence, are supporting refugees, vulnerable people, women, and children. I was deeply moved by their stories and their commitment. The United States must support these brave Ukrainians in their effort to protect their sovereignty because, let's be clear, Putin will not stop until Ukraine's democracy is dismantled, and we all know that he will not stop with Ukraine. Now, as ranking member of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, I am proud that we are also considering other significant investments in United States global leadership today, particularly the more than $9 billion in desperately needed humanitarian assistance. We're facing historic challenges of hunger, displacement, and conflict across the globe. I was recently in Chad, one of the poorest countries in the world. Thousands of refugees are fleeing the horrific war in Sudan. They are in dire need of food and just the basics to survive. These resources will enable the United States to respond to not just the humanitarian needs that we read about on the front page, but the quieter conflicts that are destroying people's lives, such as in Sudan and Haiti. This is a defining moment in our history. I urge my colleagues to respond to the remarkable strength and resilience of the Ukrainian people and stand by them by supporting this supplemental bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Blinken, appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. I don't believe it has ever been more urgent for the case to be made on the central role of development and diplomacy. And of course, the chairman spent his time talking about Israel because I don't believe that the majority can defend this allocation because the allocation is indefensible. And also, I'd like to hear in your testimony the whole issue of humanitarian assistance in Gaza and the 35,000+ people who have been killed and the strategies of Israel in terms of how productive these strategies have been into ensuring Israel's security also. The challenges of the 21st century, they can't be solved by one nation. Our president recognizes that these challenges require teamwork. They require alliances and they require true partnerships. And that's why I am really just quite frankly appalled about the trends that we're seeing in the state foreign operations appropriations bill. The fiscal year 2024 House bill proposed a huge 15% cut from the prior year. We battled back to almost a 6% cut as the final level, but still face the greatest percentage cut across appropriations bill, the greatest. As of this hearing today, the House majority has told us that they plan to cut the bill a further 11% for fiscal 25. We have a problem, Mr. Secretary. The world will continue to get smaller. We have migration issues, climate, disease, even the flow of goods and crime, unfortunately, such as drugs. They're problems that are begging for a global approach. Countries overseas continue to see the United States as a beacon of hope and promise, but I don't know how long that's going to last. How long will we be able to rest on the achievements of prior generations? The Marshall Plan, the eradication of smallpox, the end of the Cold War, PEPFAR, before we realize that we are no longer offering the same leadership. My colleagues are often quick to focus on the influence of the People's Republic of China. But I will point out that China has now more embassies and more diplomats around the world than the United States does. More. Simply put, we are being outnumbered just when countries are clamoring for greater partnerships with the United States. It's not just important that the United States is showing up for partners around the world, but equally important to face the fact that America is showing. Diversity is the American and our country's superpower. However, far too often, the representation of the United States is not reflective of the full spectrum of backgrounds and experiences that America has to offer. And I know you agree with us on this. It's true for the workforce, but it's also true who the department works with. The president has set a goal to increase the share of contract dollars going to small and disadvantaged businesses to 15% across the federal government by fiscal 25. So I commend the State Department for already exceeding that goal. But Mr. Secretary, let me tell you, that obscures the fact that Black, Asian Americans, and Hispanic-owned small businesses are getting less than 2% each of State Department contracts. That's 2% each. I believe African American-owned firms is at 1.9%. AAPI firms are at 1.45%, and Hispanic firms are at 1.9%. I'm a former 8A contractor, Mr. Secretary, in the 80s and 90s, and this is less than what was taking place in terms of contracting then. And so we have to understand and look at why these numbers are shockingly low. We've got to do a better job making sure that historically disadvantaged entrepreneurs get a larger share of the State Department contract. Members, Mr. Secretary, they're outraged, and so I intend to follow up, and I just wanted to let you know with a letter to the department asking you to outline the strategy to increase the share of contract dollars that go to all historically disadvantaged groups, and why Black and Asian American and Hispanic firms are being denied access to these contracts. Now, 20 years ago, after we first started talking about this three-legged stool of national security, diplomacy, development, and defense, we are no closer to bringing balance to that stool. In fact, we have never been so lopsided. The resources that we spend on defense dwarf the resources that we spend on our overseas presence, the pursuit of American interests, and our most basic partnerships to build a safer world. I'm sure that you see this every day. We over-rely on our military tools because that's what's available, meanwhile starving our civilian diplomatic tools. Our military understands this and is often the first to advocate for development and diplomatic tools that they see as necessary. However, successive Congresses have refused to make the investments needed to take the pressure off of military action. And now, once again, our diplomatic and development activities are facing the biggest cuts of any part of the United States government. We can't keep going on like this. If we're serious about confronting these challenges, then it must be reflected in our budget. Without sufficient development funding, we face a future struck by cycles of crises that require more and more humanitarian interventions and even military interventions and result in a less stable world. Secretary Blinken, you're currently crisscrossing the globe. You're listening to partners. You're hunting for joint solutions. And I'm sure getting an earful about United States policy. I'm eager to hear from you today what tools that you need, that the State Department needs to advance the mission of the United States and provide the leadership and partnerships of the world, that the world, quite frankly, expects of us. What do you see as the cost of us stepping back and letting others fill the void? I see that everywhere in the world. What investments are we leaving on the table? The opportunities left untaken. What do you hear from our brave diplomats around the world and what they need to do their job? And I want to thank them for their service and their sacrifices, which they're making. And I want them to know that we do value their work in spite of these huge, horrific, terrible, deep cuts that are being proposed. So I look forward to our work together, Mr. Secretary, also with you, Chairman Diaz-Balart, and with all the members of this subcommittee to make the case for why this bill needs to invest more this year and in future years to serve America, to serve the American people, and yes, quite frankly, our entire planet. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back.
Ms. Lee, right.
Thank you very much. First of all, very quickly, the United Nations. In the House bill last year, no funding was included for the United Nations regular budget. Zero to pay our treaty dues to the organization, and yet we keep hearing a lot from our House colleagues about the threat of the PRC and strategic competition. So, Mr. Secretary, how does the United States' participation and leadership at the United Nations relate to countering China's influence? And what would be the impact of the United States being absent from the United Nations, as last year's bill proposed? And then secondly, if we have time, if not, you can give us the response in writing. With regard to the Caribbean, okay, I'm pleased to see, and you mentioned the request to include the addition of 2 missions in the Caribbean. These are our closest neighbors, yet the United States has very little presence. Barbados, for example, has to cover the ambassador's 6 countries in the Eastern Caribbean with little means to access them. Now, I heard and understand that it's going to take about 5 years to gear up and to ramp up for these 2 new diplomatic missions. So what happens in the meantime? We don't have any time to waste, and so I want to know what plan is in place to ramp up these engagements in the Caribbean until we get the 2 new embassies open.
So thank you very much, and I'll try to be quick. Look, on the United Nations, we've seen a very concerted effort by China in recent years to engage, and more than engage, to try to seek positions in the United Nations so that it could have real influence over the direction that the UN takes on virtually every issue under the sun, because whether we like it or not, the United Nations is engaged in pretty much everything. It's engaged in ways that are profoundly helpful to the United States, because if the United Nations were not doing things like feeding children, vaccinating people, looking out for maternal health, making sure that people had access to electricity, et cetera, then either we'd have to be doing it on our own or no one would be doing it, and the world would be a much worse place, and that would inevitably come back to bite us. So in so many ways, it provides absolutely vital functions. One of the strange positions we're in is, if you look at program across program at the United Nations, the United States is typically the leading funder, and it's producing really important results, again, for us, because absent those results, you're going to have people who, even more people on the move, more conflict, more economic deprivation. All of this gets spun up in ways that inevitably bite us. So we're often the leading funder, and yet when we have an inability to pay our dues on time, or we get arrears on various accounts, that's a wonderful talking point for our competitors, including China or Russia, that spend far less than the United Nations, but then point to us as being the laggards. So it just doesn't make any sense, and it actually has practical implications for our ability to sustain programs that are vital to our own national interest. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we have a seat at every table where decisions are being made about norms, rules, standards that often the UN is a part of setting. So if that's taken away, we're out of the room. It's not a good thing for the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
And I'll follow up with you later if I can on the Caribbean.
The distinguished Chief Deputy.
Ranking Member Lee, you're recognized for your statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member, Mr. Members of the committee. Thank you very much for giving us a chance to be here. Is this on? I think it is now. Okay, first, believe it or not, I'm going to thank our chair for his friendship. We do disagree on each and every issue, but I want to thank him for respecting my point of view and our points of view on our side. Needless to say, I oppose the Republican fiscal 25 state and foreign operations appropriations bill as drafted. This is a deeply political extremist bill that seeks to satisfy the most radical members of Congress at the expense of our national security, global human rights, and the well-being of our allies. Now, let me remind you that currently we spend less than 0.5% of our GNP overseas with foreign assistance. This means that current spending is 50% less in real terms than, spent on diplomacy and development than during the Cold War. I must note that our House debate on this particular bill will be carefully watched by people around the world. I urge this committee to reject the floor amendments that would further cause America's friends and foes to question America's strength or resolve to tackle the biggest global issues of our day. This woefully underfunded bill revives many of the bad ideas of last year's House bill, and then it doubled down on some new ones. First and most dangerously, this bill imposes cuts to our diplomatic, development, and humanitarian programs that will weaken America and leave us very vulnerable. The measures Republicans are bringing to the House floor this week would slash our diplomatic and development programs by a shocking 12%, while at the same time seeking to increase military spending by $8.5 billion. These cuts would leave America vastly weakened and continue a dangerous trend that puts the Pentagon on steroids while leaving diplomacy and development on life support. Now, I just returned from a bipartisan delegation to Africa, where my colleagues and I, Democrats and Republicans, met with reformers in key African democracies. These leaders told us they preferred to partner with the United States over China, but too often America's presence and investments was missing in action. Countering the PRC's influence means plainly and simply showing up. Republicans can't have it both ways. This bill encourages China, Russia, and all of our adversaries to fill the void that this bill, with a 12% cut, yes, last year a 6% cut, will accomplish, and it is accomplishing that. So you can't have it both ways. This bill also takes a dishonest approach to the existential threat posed by climate change. People around the world are confronting the impacts of human-caused climate change right now. Life-threatening temperatures, crop failures, floods, and severe weather. Many of us are experiencing this in our own districts and hometowns. We can't change the temperature. Climate change is here. The past 12 months have been the hottest ever measured.
but we can help people in communities around the world to cope with the most life-threatening impacts. This bill leaves us without the tools to respond to this threat. The bill also wages war on women's reproductive freedom. 218 million women still do not have access to the tools needed to decide when and how to have a baby. And hundreds of thousands die in childbirth. That is a fact. This bill makes it harder for women to access care. It also cuts off funding to UNFPA, the one partner that provides services to mothers and their babies in the hardest places to reach. But one of the most damaging aspects of this bill is the massive abdication and retreat of United States leadership around the world. The bill projects a worldview that sees issues and countries as black and white, good and evil. If we don't like everything about an organization or can't control all of their actions, this bill prohibits funding it. It's our way or the highway. This is fundamentally undemocratic for a country that stands for democracy. Perhaps most telling is the largest increase in this bill is foreign military financing. While zeroing out the United Nations and outright prohibiting a half dozen UN bodies from being funded, the message of this bill is more weapons, less cooperation. But members, Mr. Chairman, and our ranking member, this is not how the world is. It's not how it works. This approach is isolating America. Yes, human rights violators in countries that do not share our values, they also participate in these organizations. But that is why we must stay engaged, not walk away. If we cede the ground to countries with little regard for human rights, we are enabling more injustice. The world is full of threats that don't respect borders, from climate change to pandemics to assertive dictators. We can't stick our head in the sand and hope it will go away. Let me take a moment to thank our diplomats, our Peace Corps volunteers, our Foreign Service staff, our security, our support staff, all of those who are supported. They're supported by this bill. They continue to make great sacrifices on behalf of the United States, and we are deeply grateful. Again, the world will be paying attention to our floor debate. Our allies are asking if we are serious about protecting human rights and dignity, or if we intend on building a wall around America and telling our allies to go at it alone. I urge this committee to reject these amendments and debates that will further isolate and weaken America in the eyes of both our friends and adversaries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Ranking Member Lee. Thank you for
Well, good morning, everyone. Let me first thank Leader Jeffries, Whip Clark, Chair Aguilar, our co-chair of the Pro-Choice Caucus, Diana DeGette, for their bold leadership. I am a proud Democrat, and I'm so proud of our Democratic caucus. Thank you all very much for staying the course on this issue that really is about life or death. As co-chair of the Pro-Choice Caucus with Congresswoman DeGette, I'm proud to be in this fight with all of you and with all of our incredible, inspiring coalition partners doing the work on the ground. 2 years ago, 5 extremist Supreme Court justices voted to take our country back decades and revoke a fundamental right of millions by overturning Roe. This is yet another attack on our democracy. Now, millions of Americans of reproductive age are living without access to abortion care, suffering preventable harm to their bodies and their lives. This anniversary, it's a stark reminder of the casualties in the GOP's war on reproductive freedom. But it also must be a call to action. It's a wake-up call, because this cannot continue. Tonight, the 2 candidates for president will debate for the first time in this election. I hope the country is paying attention not only to how they talk about abortion, but what they've actually done about it. From day one, the Biden administration has shown a clear and early commitment to sexual and reproductive health and rights. He has taken concrete actions to protect access to abortion, including medication abortion, the ability to travel for reproductive care, access to affordable quality contraception, safeguarding the privacy of patients and healthcare providers, and more. The extreme GOP and their allies on the Supreme Court could not be more opposite. They've continued an assault on reproductive freedom through harmful legislation at each level of government and in states across the nation. Let's be clear. Republicans are ready and eager to institute a national ban and create more suffering. We cannot let them do that. We cannot let GOP extremism continue to subvert the will of the people. As someone who had an unsafe and illegal abortion before Roe, we cannot allow this country to revert back to those days. The majority of Americans support the right to an abortion. Our caucus won't stop fighting until our laws reflect our democratic values and our own freedoms to make our own health care decisions without interference, mind you, from judges and elected officials. Thank you again. And now I'd like to yield to our woman warrior, Diana DeGette.
Thank you.
Let me take a moment to thank Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman and our entire Congressional Black Caucus, the PAC, for pulling us together today to speak for just a few minutes with regard to our Vice President, who will be the next President of the United States of America. You know, and in listening to our members, let me just first associate myself with everything that was said, but also just add a couple of things, and I'm reminded of the scriptures, the book of Queen Esther. She has come for such a time as this. Vice President Harris is prepared, she's ready, she's experienced, she's faced many, many challenges, and she's pushed through those with people because people connect with her and understand who she is, and that she is for them, not for corporations and profits and putting people first. She does constantly. And I met Vice President Harris decades ago. She was born in Oakland, California, raised in Berkeley in the East Bay of Alameda County. And let me tell you just a couple of things about her. She ran for the Attorney General, as you know, of California. No one thought she could win. No one. Someone said, do you think you're going to elect a black woman as the top cop in California? I said, yes, we do. She won. But she won because people circled the wagons and voted for her because they knew her experience and her brilliance, and she was the best candidate. When she ran for the United States Senate, there were those who didn't believe she could win. And she said, watch me. And as Dr. Maya Angelou said, in spite of all the challenges, and still we rise, and she won. I was there with her when she announced her candidacy for the United States presidency in Oakland, California. She lifted up the legacy of my mentor, and I know many members' mentors here, the Honorable Shirley Chisholm, who was the first black woman who ran for the presidency. And Vice President Harris then, in her kickoff for her presidential campaign, lifted up this legacy and talked about this was another step in that march to justice and freedom and equity. And finally, I'll just say that we have to, and I'm glad that the CBC is so happy to be here, because lifting up President Biden with a sense of gratitude and thankfulness is extremely important during this period, because he put country over self. His history has been one, and my sister here knows, it's been transformational in terms of equity and in terms of justice and in terms of ensuring that African Americans and people of color and people who did not have a seat at the table have one. Vice President Kamala Harris was someone he appointed and selected as his vice president because of those reasons. Because of those reasons. And so coming from Oakland, California, and Berkeley, and the East Bay, and Alameda County, where we know her well, we know that she brings people together. We have a very diverse constituency in California. She cares about everyone. She's a leader. I was with her, many of us were there in Florida, talking about reproductive freedom in Florida. Thousands of people welcomed her. And so she will bring this country together. She is unifying our Democratic Party, not will, she is unifying it. And we're going to march on to victory, and we're going to connect with voters, because it's going to be the people and the voters of the United States of America who are going to make sure that the scriptures are going to be fulfilled, that she has come truly for such a time as this. Thank you again.
A minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today as my Republican colleagues continue to rail against everything woke and for their Project 2025 agenda. Now, most members don't even know what woke even means, so let me just try to lay it out. As the NAACP reminded us in a 2023 resolution, the word woke has been used by Black Americans even as far back as the 1940s, when the Black mine workers issued the statement, and I quote, "We were asleep, but we will stay woke from now on." Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert this official NAACP resolution titled "Reclaiming the Word Woke as Part of the African American Culture" be inserted into the congressional record.
Without objection.
Thank you. In the 2010, it began to be used widely, primarily by Black Americans, to bring awareness to social inequities such as racial injustice, sexism, and denial of LGBTQ+ rights. Today, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines woke as, I quote, "aware of and actively attentive to important societal facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice." And also, as the Merriam-Webster Dictionary quotes me from a speech that I gave several years ago, we have a moral obligation to stay woke and take a stand and be active and challenge injustices in our community.
Thank you. For what